Hi there, welcome back to Stillwater's ASMR. Today's video is one that's been like churning in my head for days now, and I've actually gone to the effort of actually making notes. I don't normally do that. I normally just ramble incoherently and just let it go where it goes, but this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I want to address certain topics and deal with certain things. So, hello, welcome to Stillwater's ASMR. I can't remember if I said that already. This is an ASMR channel. This video, I'm hoping, will be good ASMR material. I hope that if you're trying to fall asleep, that it's effective for that. But I am also passionate about farming and animal welfare and these issues. And as a content creator, this is my platform to be able to share my thoughts and opinions and kind of put out there what I think. My hood's annoying me because he's like crooked. So yeah, this video is going to be exploring the ethics around farming, particularly, but not limited to, livestock farming. We'll also discuss ethics of plant sort of production. And there's a variety of different things I want to talk about. This may, depending on how this pans out in terms of how long it goes on for, this may be a multi-parter. I don't know. I'm going to see how it goes. One thing I would want to say at the very beginning is that I welcome constructive discussion in the comments, and if you have got questions and sort of points that you want to make, things you want me to address and explore further, maybe, please by all means come to the comments. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk about this stuff. I will be trying to address this whole topic and everything I talk about without name calling, with respect. And I request and expect the same sort of respect and civility in the comments. Any comments that are being straight out hateful or insulting to any group, whether it's calling farmers murderers or, even, I hate the term snowflake. I'm so done with it. So if you want to be calling vegan snowflakes, again, I will be deleting any of those sorts of comments, aimed at either side of the discussion. I'm not going to be putting up with abuse being targeted at anyone. I'm going to try and be compassionate and understanding and mature in how I discuss this, and basically I am open to have those sorts of conversations in the discussion, those sort of discussions in the comments, but I will not tolerate any sort of abuse. So now that we've said that, now that we're all going to behave like respectable adults, let's have a chat. So, I am a firm believer that our life experiences and our culture and our belief systems all mould and shape our worldview. So each person will have a slightly different worldview because they will have had slightly different life experiences. People from different parts of the world and from different walks of life and from different sort of religious or spiritual backgrounds will all have slightly different worldviews because we're all products of our own unique circumstances. And I will be presenting my personal worldview in this video. I try to stay humble and open to being wrong. I'm a fan of a horse trainer called Monty Roberts. Now, he deals with non-violent methods of training horses, and he often, in the course of his work, comes across people who use very violent and aggressive methods, and he tries to remain what's the word? He tries to remain like non-judgmental towards these people, because he's very much we all have a certain selection of tools in our toolbox, and if you do the best with what you have available. So if all you know is one way of doing things, then that's how you will do things. But as soon as you learn better, you should do better. And he tries to stay humble about, this is how I do things right now, but if you show me a better way, I will do it your way tomorrow. And so I'm trying to apply that same sort of ethos to this. I have listened to arguments put forward by vegans and vegetarians, and I try to really take on board the comments that get made. Alrighty, I'm back. My husband phoned, and so kind of interrupted my stream of thought. That probably is going to happen multiple times during this, because I've left some voicemail messages with different people for them to phone me back, and that's so annoying when you're like guaranteed they're going to phone me back when I'm in the middle of doing a video. But yeah, as I was saying, basically the cable's like touching the mic. I have tried to listen to arguments made by sort of like the other side of the fence, and because I think this topic is really important, I have tried to really sit and think about what they're saying and really like hold it up and sort of make sure that my arguments stack up against it, make sure that I'm comfortable with my worldview, and you know, the whole make sure I can sleep at night with how I do things. So I'm gonna I've got a few different topics that I'm gonna run through, and I've kind of made myself some notes to try and keep it relatively on track, and I hope that it's interesting, informative, at least good ASMR if nothing else, and kind of having this discussion and this debate. I don't anticipate to be converting any vegans or vegetarians to being meat eaters, but I would like to present my side of things as a livestock farmer, because I feel like more and more we're getting a lot of abuse online, and this is my only platform, so I'm using it to basically put across sort of my side of the story, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I feel like the internet it's very easy to get into echo chambers where you only hear the side of the story that fits your own narrative and your own worldview, and people can end up in quite extreme camps that they maybe wouldn't be in if they had more discussions with people from the other side of the fence in a non-confrontational manner. So I fully intend for this to be informative or kind of conversational, discussing, rather than confrontational. So yeah, and because, as I said, I firmly believe that we are the products of our own upbringing, our background, our so many things that feed into our worldview. I just want to start by doing a little bit of an introduction about me, about who I am, and some of the key things that feed into where I'm at with my opinions that I'll be talking about in this video. So hi, I'm Ellie. I have always been an animal lover. Ever since I was a little girl, I have loved animals. Just like, I've always loved animals. And when I can still remember when I was in primary 6, I'd been saying to my dad how I wanted to go and help animals, and my dad is very like, well, you have to do well at school. So he was very much like, you know, I'd come home and be like, oh, I finished my maths before everybody else, and he'd be like, well, you should be asking your teacher for more then. And so there was one day at school where I'd finished my maths work, and the teacher was like, oh, well, then you can have like some free time while everyone else finishes theirs. And I was like, can I get some more? And she's like, weird child. So she took me out of the classroom and was like, what is going on with you? And I like burst out into tears because I was like so passionate, like, I want to help the animals. And I had dreams and aspirations of moving to Africa and saving elephants from poachers. That's what I wanted to do when I was a little girl. And, you know, was passionate about animal conservation and animal welfare and saving the animals. And so you'd think I'd be a prime candidate to become a vegetarian or a vegan, because I care deeply about animal welfare and about animals. I also I grew up in a Christian home, and I still view myself as a Christian. I have faith, but I'm also a firm believer in science as well. So I don't believe the world was made in 7 days. I think it took a little bit longer than that. But I do believe that there was a creator God behind it. Okay, I'm back again. As I predicted, I had a phone back from one of the people I'd left a voicemail message with. So we're back. So as I was saying, I think I was on the topic of my faith and how that influences my worldview. So I believe that there is a creator God that created the world, and I believe that we have been given the earth and its contents, but with the understanding that we are meant to be good stewards of what we have been given. I'm a firm believer that we are responsible for the world around us and that we should be looking after it, that it is a gift, that it is not ours to own, that we are basically stewards. We're meant to be looking after what we've been given, and so that's a really important element of my faith, which does reflect in my opinions. I am also science-based, however, so I do believe that like what I've learned from science, so that does tie in as well. So I've talked about animal lover, I have faith, but I also believe in science, and so I believe in things like evolution, I believe in natural selection, and sort of things that science can teach us and can tell us. And I'm also really interested in the environment. So at university I studied chemical engineering with environmental management, actually before I even got to university. So at school I studied, I couldn't do all three sciences, so I picked chemistry and physics, and that's kind of what I did through my high school schooling. But I did get a chance in my final year of high school to do like dabble in biology, and I was doing like the lowest level of biology that I could do, just to keep it easy because I didn't want a difficult year. I was able to like tag along with my friends who were doing like advanced higher. It's like first year university level biology, and I tagged along with them for one of the modules of their biology course, which was the environmental biology, talking about ecosystems and how cycles work together, and I found that utterly fascinating. So when you look at my certificate of like my school record, I've got like the lowest level biology where you learn about the cells, and then I've got like this sort of several levels up just standalone module on the environmental biology. I found it, it was only 3 people doing that course, and she didn't, the other 2 people were away that day, and my friend was like, can you come along? So I tagged along for that one lesson, and the teacher was like, well, if you're going to be here hanging out in my class, then you're going to do the work. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. And she's like, well, if you're free during this lesson, then you're more than welcome to come. So I went and tagged along to that one module. Didn't do the rest. There was like 3 modules in the advanced higher biology. I didn't do the other 2 modules. I just did the one module that was about environmental stuff, and found it really fascinating. And at university, as I said, I studied environmental management at university, and I found it really fascinating. Like, I loved learning about how the different like the water and nutrient cycles, and how ecosystems, everything impacts everything else. Like, there's nothing, you can't go into an ecosystem and tamper with one element of it and not affect everything else. Everything is in balance, everything works together. And that's something I find really interesting and really fascinating. And the impact that we have on that is profound. And so I'm a firm believer in climate change. I'm a firm believer in our part that we have played in climate change. I'm distraught at what we've done in terms of pollution, the plastic waste in the world, and what we have done to the earth that we've been given. Part of my degree, so my dissertation at university, I've got a master's degree, and my dissertation was on life cycle analysis. So I've studied about life cycle analysis, and it's something that I'm a firm believer in. I think it's important that we look at things in the full big picture, and I think a lot of times people look at one little element of something and they don't look at the full big picture, and that's something we're going to talk about in more detail later. So that's kind of like who I am. But in terms of like my current jobs, I am a farmer, and I am a licensed slaughterman, because slaughter person sounds odd, but for a living I work at an abattoir. That is my main source of income right now, and because I don't make income from having a farm, don't be daft. So I call myself a farmer because it's a term people recognise, but I'm actually a crofter. Crofts are a Scottish specific concept. It's like a small holding, but it's protected by special legislation here in Scotland. I think I've got another video where I talk about crofts and crofting law and that kind of thing. Trying to get house insurance at the moment, and it's like, we don't own the house and we don't own the land, we're tenants. The landlord owns the land, but he's not responsible for the house, and it's complicated. So that's kind of where I currently am, and it might sound really odd that somebody who loved animals growing up and who's passionate about all that kind of stuff, and who once upon a time wanted to rescue elephants in Africa, now works killing animals for a living. So I'm going to talk about how the thought processes behind that, and how I sleep at night basically, and how I am comfortable with the life that I'm living. Well, actually no, I'm not comfortable. There are elements I want to change, and I will be taking active steps to try and improve, because there's things I'm like, I could do better, and we will be making over the for the rest of my life, I will probably be trying to improve on things. So top topic number 1, overpopulation. It's my opinion and my belief. Again, this whole video is going to be about my worldview and my beliefs. It's my opinion and my belief that the world is overpopulated with humans. The whole topic of sustainability, I think, is really important. And when we look at the resources that we consume year in and year out as a global population, the earth is not big enough to produce what we consume and to absorb the waste that we generate. the earth has an ability to absorb so much waste, but when we produce more waste than it can absorb, I think if you look at like truly sustainable systems, you have to go back to indigenous peoples. And if you look at the different indigenous populations around the world, they all have very different diets and very different ways of living, ways of clothing themselves, ways of constructing their dwellings, whether they're nomadic or whether they're sort of permanently located. And it's all completely dependent upon the ecosystems in which they lived. I'm using past tense because unfortunately, colonization has significantly affected their way of life. So there's probably very few indigenous people still living their sort of true indigenous way of living that aren't being influenced and affected by kind of a more modern way of doing things. And if you go back to those peoples, then they worked, like they lived completely in sync with the earth, and everything they got was from their local environment, and they made use of everything. Like if they killed an animal, they made use of the entire carcass. And nowadays it's a hot topic to talk about zero waste. They didn't really have waste in the way that we have waste, and now the waste they generated could be absorbed back into the environment. And their impact on, they were part of that ecosystem, that cycle. And they were part of the balance. And now we have moved to a point where there are so many people on planet Earth that and our whole way of living, our whole consumer lifestyle, our whole economic models, it's all about consuming more, and it's all about technology that we use. I mean, I'm using a smartphone to record this. I've got a microphone, like all these electronics and the equipment and the technology. It's very incredibly dirty industries. It's very polluting, and it's heartbreaking, the damage we're doing to the earth, and I'm part of that, and I acknowledge that I'm part of that. And part of that issue of being overpopulated and the damage we do to the earth is that to feed the global population, whether we're talking about feeding them plant-based diets or whether we're talking about feeding them things that involve animal products, it is damaging. Industrial scale agriculture is damaging to the earth, and I'm going to talk more about that later. But it's sort of a reality of the world that we live in. I do not believe it is possible for every single person on this planet to live sustainably in the true sense of the term, not causing harm to the earth, because there's too many of us. I'm fortunate and I'm very privileged that where I live in the world, if I work hard and get to a certain point, I can have probably quite a big percentage of my diet produced from the land that I live on. But I'm very aware that is a privileged position, and that a lot of people, with the industrialisation and urbanisation of the world, with so many people living in dense population centres and cities and things, they will not be able to grow their own food and produce their own food and access food that's been produced in a sustainable manner. That is just the reality of the world that we live in. So there's that. And touching on Indigenous people, how what is sustainable will look different depending on where in the world you are, and what I think it's really important that we take into account different ecosystems that we have on the planet, and different balances and I think, I'm going to touch on that again later, that is really important. Understanding that what's right for somebody living in one location isn't necessarily right for somebody living somewhere else. The biggest concept that I want to kind of promote in this video is the fact that this whole topic is complex and complicated, and there's no like simple solution. We as humans like to bring things down to like a really simple solution, a black and white, and there's a lot of grey in this, and other colours too. Other colours are available. So kind of moving on to that whole issue of urbanisation and industrialisation and capitalism and everything, we have become very detached from nature. If you step back 100 years ago, people's relationship with the earth, people's relationship with life and death, people's relationship with the food that they consumed was very, very different to where we live now. Nowadays, if you go back in time, the majority of the population would have lived in a rural setting. They would have been more hands-on involved in the production of the food that they ate themselves. If they didn't have raise animals themselves, their next door neighbour probably did, and they would have seen the process. They would have, if they weren't involved in like killing a chicken for dinner themselves, they would have probably have seen it happening as a matter of course. So people were far more, people knew what it took to grow a potato, people knew what it took to grow a field of wheat. People were more hands-on involved in the production of their food. They would have known exactly where it came from, all of the steps involved in getting it onto their plate. I said even if they weren't involved in all the steps themselves, they would have known and understood what was involved with the food. They knew where it came from and how it got onto their plate. We are so detached from that now that you go to the supermarket and you get a tin or a packet, and you, as in my previous life as a chemical engineer, that was one of the industries I could have gone into, was food production. And I always felt that if a chemical engineer is getting involved in food production, it's no longer food. And because we get this industrial scale food production where the engineers are involved, and we're so detached from the food that we consume. You have kids who don't understand like that chips are potatoes, and people that they'll eat meat but they don't want to think about that it came from something cute and fluffy, and we're very, very detached from where people be eating food, not really putting much consideration into how it's produced or where it's produced. If you ask somebody, where does the chicken you had for dinner last night, where did it come from? A lot of people will be like, I don't know. And I think that is a fundamental problem. There are a lot of problems in our world that are the result of industrialisation and globalisation and capitalism, which it's not just food that we have that same. It's the same with like the clothes that we wear. How many of us are wearing clothing? I could well be wearing clothing right now that came from a sweatshop in a third world country, made by children. Like I don't know where my clothes came from, so it could have. I don't know. We're so detached from, and our lives are so busy and so complicated that you're having to go out to work and earn your money and pay the bills, that you don't have the time to do that research and find out where your clothes came from and find out where your food came from, because we have all these pressures of the modern life, and we're all guilty. We all have blood on our hands in some capacity. We're all complicit. I don't think there's anybody on this planet who can be like, I have lived a perfectly immaculate life. I've done no harm to anything. We have all done harm to something in some capacity. And it's kind of the imperfect world that we live in. And tied into that detachment from nature, that detachment from the food cycle, from the food production, is also a detachment from death, especially in the West. We, 100 years ago, if somebody passed away, you would have kept them. I'm saying 100 years ago, it's probably longer than that because time keeps ticking by, but if somebody passed away, you would have had elderly relatives in the home with you. You would have several generations in one home. You'd be looking after your elderly relatives. Children would be growing up, seeing elderly relatives growing old and passing away in the home. And then you would have kept their dead body in the home until the burial. You would have dressed and washed your own dead and dealt with and looked after and cared for your own dead before the burial. Nowadays, we pack up our old people to care homes and the sick and dying to hospices, and when they pass away, they get whisked away by funeral companies who put in a funeral home, and you might go and see the dead body, but you don't interact, you don't touch it, you don't interact with it. Somebody else washes it and dresses it and deals with it and puts makeup on it to make it look not dead. And we're very detached from that process now. There's a mortician in California who's got a channel, I think it's Ask a Mortician, I can't remember if that's, I'll maybe put a link, but she really, I think she's called Caitlin, and she really advocates for normalising death, normalising that whole process, and sort of like reclaiming it. It's, because we've become so detached from it, it's become this scary thing, and it's like, and I think that also impacts on our dealing with dead animals, because we have this whole thing of death. It's become this big thing that we're so detached from, where when you know it's a natural thing, it changes your perception of life and death. And when you deal with it more hands-on a daily basis, it does change things. And there's lots of these topics which we'll kind of circle back to. I'm aware that I've already been going on for a while, so this might end up being, as I said, a multi-parter video. We'll kind of see, I'll keep rambling and see how it goes. So we've discussed how worldviews affect things. I've talked about overpopulation, sustainability, Indigenous peoples and ecosystems, that detachment from nature, that detachment from death. And now I want to address one of the biggest topics around the whole debate of whether or not we should be eating animals. And that is the concept of animals versus people. I'm aware that when I mention my faith, some people may have had an opinion about that, in terms of there's some religious groups have a very kind of like, humans were not evolved from animals, we are different, we were created different, and they look at animals like a lesser than. And humans in general, on so many different topics, like to take black and white extremes. And I think a lot of things in the world need to actually be like a more sensible middle ground. And one second, I'm just going to quickly blow my nose. Alrighty, and I think with there's two very extreme fields of not fields of thought, like ways of thinking. Animals are these dumb creatures that are like less than us, and we're to be masters of them, and there's this very clear distinction. And then there's this other school of thought, which is that animals are completely equal to us as humans and should have completely equal rights and everything else to us humans. I think there's somewhere in between. So if you hold the view that animals are completely equal to us as humans, then quite right, with the exception of like drastic survival situations, you should never eat an animal. Like, definitely not. If you think about, there's certain exceptions, like the Andes airplane crash, where the survivors were eating the dead passengers to survive. I think nobody would judge them, because you're like, well, if it's a case of if you didn't eat a human, you were going to die, and they were dead anyway, then you might as well eat them. Let's not let them go to waste. So from that perspective, there's certain situations where it's acceptable to eat people, like in those extreme survival situations. And, you know, if you hold that idea that animals are the same as humans, and should have equal rights, then by all means you should never be eating a human. You should never be eating an animal, except for those extreme survival situations, which, let's be honest, very few of us will ever be in, you know, unless you're looking at places like places where there's like famines and real severe food shortages and real problems, and people are dying of starvation. Then it's like, by all means, they should eat meat. They should eat animals and meat, but the rest of us should abstain. Personally, I don't believe that animals are completely equal, but I also don't go as extreme as the people who are like, animals are dumb creatures, they don't have any feelings and emotions, and, you know, we can do them what we will because we're the masters of them. I also don't go to that extreme. I'm like in the middle. I find animal psychology fascinating, and I find science fascinating, and I think it's our job as the intelligent species to study other creatures, to understand them, and to behave towards them accordingly to the information that we have available. Like, for example, just recently there's some new research and studies come out about octopi. I don't know what the plural word for 8-legged sea creatures is, and I think in the UK they're just updating legislation about lobsters and, you know, what kind of pain they can feel and how you can handle and cook them and all that kind of stuff, which I applaud. I welcome that. My personal, from having worked with animals and from having the exposure I have, my personal opinion is that different species of animals are different. And it's important to learn about them and learn those differences. And for example, also to understand, so I believe that all creatures, if they have nerves, they can feel pain. And I believe that all creatures, no matter how stupid they are, because it's the same for people, can feel distress. You know, even if you've got an animal that's really not capable of much more functioning, they're still capable of being distressed and being in pain. And that is where it is my job as somebody who worked with animals to minimise any pain and distress and suffering. And that is something I hold very important. And that's something I think should never be, because I think previously there would be the attitude that, oh, they're dumb creatures, they don't feel pain, they don't, and I think that that's a very immoral point of view, because they do feel pain, they do feel emotions. But I think we can tend to put human thoughts and things on animals that they're not experiencing. For example, using some common examples that get used, I see often used in debates, is I see when they talk about artificial insemination of cows, I see people throwing around language about how the farmer is raping the cow. And I would politely challenge the use of that behaviour. If you have ever experienced, as a human, experienced rape, it is a deeply traumatic event. And for a human to be forcibly inseminated would be a significant thing, it would, that would be horrendous. And this is where cows are different from people. The thoughts that they're capable of are different. And I think it's very important to understand that, and to understand when you're looking after an animal, it's really important to understand what its needs are, the psychology that it experiences, so you can effectively and properly care for it. A cow, like if you were to watch a woman being forcibly artificially inseminated or raped, it would look very different to if you were to go to a farm and watch a farmer artificially inseminate a cow. I have seen a cow being artificially inseminated. I've watched my cousin do it. The cow was standing eating its silage, going, yummy food, munch, 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 munch. It's a cow who's used to being handled, so it didn't really cause her any distress, or maybe a bit of like if you've ever seen a dog getting a rectal body temperature, getting their temperature taken with a rectal thermometer, there's a little bit of like my dog, we had a dog growing up, and the look she gave the vet with the indignation of, you just put that where? This cow didn't even react like that. She was like literally head in silage, having a good munch. Maybe swished her tail, and maybe like moved her feet about a little bit. She's used to being handled. She's used to being worked with. It didn't cause her any distress. It didn't cause her any upset. It was in and done, and when the time comes for her to have a calf, they don't have the same sort of emotions and thought processes that we go through. Like if a cow or a sheep, and this is where animals are different, I think that's really important to distinguish. So something like an ape may have a very different experience than something like a cow when it comes to their attachment to their offspring. And that's where I think it's really important to understand the species that you're dealing with. So for example, elephants create lifelong bonds as a herd, and they have these complex family groups that they keep those ties for life. With sheep and cows, if you have ever worked with them, and if you take a flock of sheep, for example, and you were to put them out onto an open bit of ground and leave them to it, the sheep have very good maternal instincts. Well, normally, not all of them, but they'll give birth and they'll have this really strong maternal instinct to look after their offspring. They will look after it. They will make sure it's looked after, fed. They'll defend it from predators. But once it gets to a certain point, and the sheep instinct is telling it to reproduce again, because that's a instinctive thing that's built into sheep, is to, it's built into all animals to reproduce. But at a certain time of year, they'll come back into season and they'll be looking for the ram, and they'll be like, piss off to their offspring. It'll get bolted if it comes to them. It'll be, sent away. Fend for yourself now. She'll then go on to have subsequent offspring, and she will have no interest. If you were to reunite a sheep with her offspring from a previous year, there's not going to be some grand, oh, you're home, it's so lovely to see you, come have a cuppa. It's like a big deal, you're another sheep. They don't long to meet their grandchildren. It's not like humans. Humans, when we have children, I don't know how much animals are aware that they're pregnant, but we have all these bigger thoughts and things, and when you're pregnant you have all these hopes and ambitions and dreams, and when you have a child, it's for life. It's a huge impact on your life, and they will occupy space in your brain for the rest of your life, whether you keep that child or not. With a sheep, they're very attentive for that year, maybe, while they have the lamb, and then they move on to to the next thing, and they're not losing sleep over it. So when people talk about, and I said that's where different species are different. So for example, if you have, I think like dolphins, I think maybe have family systems for life, and you'll see orca herds where they're still, you know, the children are still with the mothers, and elephants and like the big apes and things like that. But sheep are not, you know, and it's really important to understand that different creatures have different, I mean, even cats and dogs, once they've had their offspring, they're like, off you pop, I'm going to have another litter. And yes, you do get dogs form like a pack, and they have like their family. But it's unlikely if you were to introduce a dog back to its puppies from like years previous, that they're going to be like, oh, this is my offspring. And I think it's really important to understand those differences when you're dealing with animals, to understand that they have different thought processes. So when you take a calf off of a cow, you know, they often talk about calves being ripped away from their mothers on dairy farms and the trauma that does to cows. Yes, cows do have an instinct to look for their calf. Their udders are going to get full of milk, they're going to get uncomfortable, and they will have an instinct to go, because it's an inbuilt instinct to, I must go find my calf, because that's how the species has survived, because the mothers have got good mother instincts to look after their offspring. They will go and look after their offspring. It amazed me when I had my daughter. I couldn't, you know, I just had an exhausting 24 hours of labour, or however long it was. It maybe wasn't even quite that long. And I was exhausted. She sort of safely arrived. The midwives took her out of the room so I could get asleep. And I couldn't sleep because I was just like, I have a baby. Where is my baby? I must make sure my baby is safe. And it really surprised me, that instinct that just kicks in. And it's like, I must look after my child. And that is a very base instinct. But the human emotion and hopes and dreams and wanting to meet your grandchildren, that isn't, you know, animals don't, at least not that sheep and cows don't have that. And it's really important not to attach our thoughts and emotions onto an animal. It's sort of like when you see people hugging a dog. Dogs typically don't like to be hugged in the way that we do. It can be very threatening to them. It's really important to understand animal psychology specific to that species, because animal psychology is different from species to species. And when somebody's like, oh, I know like dog psychology, I'm going to go train a horse, completely different. Dog psychology, you can use food as a treat and a reward, because as a predator creature, it has to work for its food in like the wild. A prey creature like a horse has never had to work for its food, so it doesn't make a connection as food being a reward, because as a horse, if you think, and when it's out in the wild, the food is just there. It doesn't have to work for it. So when you try and use food as a reward with training horses, it doesn't work as effectively, because they don't make the connection, I'm being rewarded. They just think, ooh, this person, if you nudge them, drops sweeties. And so you can end up having a horse that starts biting because you've been giving it treats, and then thinks this person's a walking treat dispenser. They don't think, I did something good, I've gotten a treat. So it's really important to understand the psychology behind the breed that you're specifically, the species that you're specifically working with, and the breed, because even within species, you will have, like with dogs, for example, when we have bred dogs for one purpose versus another, their instinct and their wiring is different. And it's important to understand the motivations in species and also in breeds. So that's basically because we have mastered technology and communication, I would be bold enough to state that I think humans are the most furthest evolved of all different creatures. This comes back to my faith. I believe that we were created different. I still think we evolved from monkeys, our common ancestor. But I believe that we are a step different. There's like a connection, there's a step that we made that's different that other creatures haven't made. there is a scale. I think the whole conscious thought and the sentience and all that, I think that's a scale. I think there's other creatures that are closer to us than others. So for example, dolphins and elephants and maybe even pigs. I've heard people saying pigs are quite clever. But it's not just about intelligence, it's also about the thoughts. So even the most intelligent animal are driven by needing their needs met. So their instinct drives them to reproduce, to find food, to find water, to find shelter, to defend themselves. That's like inbuilt standard instinct in all creatures, otherwise the species wouldn't survive. The thing that's different with humans is that we have hopes and dreams and aspirations. So, having spoken at length about the difference between animals and people, in my view, that we are different, I often have people, when we talk about death, and I've heard quite a few times the argument that no human has the right to choose to end another creature's life. We bring in farming, we bring animals into the world that didn't ask to be brought into the world, and then we end their lives when they didn't ask to be ended. And what gives me the right to decide? What makes killing a sheep to then eat it different from killing a human for whatever reason? I mean, you probably don't want to be killing a human to eat them, because that's, I said, other than those exceptional circumstances, not cool. Even then, even on the exceptional circumstances, you probably shouldn't kill them to eat them. That's probably breaching ethics. I'm going to see somebody walk away from this video going, she's suggesting we should eat people. No. I've completely derailed myself. With a person, when you end a person's life, people have hopes and dreams and aspirations. Even if they're little hopes and dreams and aspirations, we all have hopes and dreams and aspirations. We've got plans for tomorrow. We have got plans for next year. We've got plans for 10 years' time. Whether it's to travel, to study, to see our grandchildren grow up, we've got hopes and dreams and plans that we have looking forward. With an animal like a sheep, each year looks the same. Their drive is to eat grass, poop, and when the time comes in the calendar that they go into season and they go into heat, they want to have sex and they want to have that. Then they'll have offspring, and then they'll be like, oh, I must look after my offspring, and then they'll hit a point where they're like, no, I'm done looking after my offspring, go away, and then eat some more grass, and then, oh, I'm in heat again, let's go and find the ram and let's get pregnant again. But they're not even intentionally thinking that, they're just thinking, like, their hormones are telling them that they're horny. They'll allow the ram to do his job, and then they'll have a lamb, and it there's no like, next year I'm hoping to travel to Spain, or I'm planning to do some crafts, or I'm planning to, they don't have plans, they don't have hopes and aspirations, they don't think, oh, I'm really looking forward to seeing my lamb growing up. It's different, and every year looks the same for a sheep. So giving a sheep one good year on a farm where you then kill them at the end of the year and eat them, versus putting a sheep in a sanctuary and giving them 10 good years, for the sheep, each of those years looks the same. Like, it doesn't really make much difference. Whereas for a human, giving them 1 year versus 10 years, that's a big difference. Like, that's a big difference. Because you can pack a lot into 10 years and not so much into one. So that's where I'm like, that's one big difference for me between animals and people, is that whole difference in hopes and dreams, and the difference between the instinct. We all have the instinct, and one thing that I am passionate about, as I've kind of waffled on the subject, is the whole notion that if you're going to be looking after an animal, it is important that you remove your human thoughts and emotions and hopes and dreams and worldview, and that you learn that animal's needs, their psychology, and you look after them meeting their needs. You could get a well-meaning vegetarian or vegan who has rescued a sheep from slaughter and is looking after them at home, who could cause that sheep more pain and suffering through ignorance of not knowing how to look after it properly than a well-informed, compassionate, commercial farmer who breeds and raises their sheep and sends them to slaughter. And so it's really important to understand how to look after an animal properly and how to meet its needs properly. Because I said, you can cause more pain and suffering to an animal keeping it alive in the wrong conditions than killing it in a humane manner. And I'm now going to move on to holding my hands up and saying, I acknowledge that there is profound problems with industrial scale farming, both for livestock farming and arable farming, like growing crops. But we're going to deal with the animal side first. So as I've been talking, it's, animals feel pain, they feel stress. As a farmer, it is my job. Also, I just want to quickly, I can't remember where I was planning on fitting this in. I also want to quickly address the whole issue of people arguing about the whole, as a farmer, you're bringing animals into the world to then kill them that never asked to be brought into the world. If we're going to get into the ethics of bringing things into the world that didn't ask to be brought into the world, I would argue have you had children? Because having children is bringing something into the world that didn't ask to be in the world, that you're making that choice to bring it into the world. And for me, it has a particular edge to it. I had to really think carefully before having children. I have got a chronic illness, an autoimmune disease called Crohn's disease, which has a genetic component, so it can be hereditary. And I had to think really carefully before having children, because there's a good chance I could pass my poor genetic code onto my offspring and curse them with a life with an autoimmune disease. And I had to think carefully, and the question I asked myself was, if I got the choice between being born and having Crohn's or never existing at all, I would always pick to be born and have Crohn's and still live my life than to never have existed at all. So I apply that to my farming. Like, I'd rather bring sheep into the world and treat them well than for them never to have had the chance to experience life. And then in terms of the, so if it's a case of, right, you can come into the world, but you're only going to live a year or two, and then you'll be killed from heat. I think I'd still rather be like, I'd still rather come and experience that. When you see the lambs playing in the field, they're having a great time, I'm like, I think they'd still rather experience that, even if it's short-lived, than just not experience it at all. And when it also comes to the whole deciding when they die, I've done the argument about they don't have hopes and dreams. 1 year to a sheep is the same as 10. But as well, if you have worked with a sheep or wildlife, if you've sat and watched a wildlife documentary, if animals were left in the wild to their own devices, more times as not, their deaths aren't pretty. an animal in the wild that lives like a truly pure life, it will get sick or injured or grow old, and it will then suffer as a result. It will either be vulnerable to predator attacks, and then it might get eaten, but it might get eaten alive. It might get sick and suffer. Even just working with sheep on a farm where we do our best to look after them, they find creative ways to die, and it can be really harrowing. I mean, we had a sheep that went over the cliffs the other day, and I say the other day, it was like the other week, and we assumed she just slipped and fell. Like, accidents happen, these things, you get ones that fall ill, and if they were out in the wild, these things would all still be happening, they'd still be dying, and often in quite unpleasant ways. I think people forget how cruel nature can be. In a abattoir setting, where we are killing the animals ourselves, it is literally my job, when I'm working at the abattoir, it is literally my job to get licensed as a slaughter person. I had to pass an exam which was all about the welfare of the animal. From the point when it arrives at the abattoir to where it's held in holding pens and then moved into the area where you then kill it, when you're like just moving them between pens, when you're physically handling the animal, to then, we use the captive bolt method, when you're then killing it, bleeding it out, the whole, to get my license as a slaughter person, I had to demonstrate that I could do that whole process in a way that minimised any stress, any suffering, anything for the animal. Having killed sheep and literally hands-on done it myself, and not just watched it being done, having done it myself, I can attest that it's done quickly, it's done cleanly, it's done smoothly. The animals, people go on about, oh, you're torturing them and you're, we are slaughtering them, but you're torturing them and all that. And it's like, no. At no point in the process do we torture our animals, because that would be unethical. It would be bad for the meat, if nothing else, because stress creates cortisol, which makes bad meat. And literally, as I'm handling the animals, I'm speaking to them in a calm tone of voice. I'm reassuring them. I'm telling them it's going to be okay, because it is. In a moment, they're going to be gone, and they're not going to feel any pain. They're not going to suffer. They have a really quick, clean death. There are people in this world that are suffering from terminal illnesses and the effects of old age, who have long, painful, drawn-out deaths, who would probably be so grateful for the quick death that they get at the abattoir. It is quick, it is clean. So that kind of addresses the challenge about, well, you bring them into the world and then you take them out of the world. I feel like I've kind of addressed that about I'm content with killing a sheep. If for me as a farmer, it's my job. I look after them as best I can. I make sure that they have everything they need physically. I make sure that their psychological needs. So, for example, sheep need to have, they're herd animals. They need to be in a herd. So you don't have sheep off by itself. I look after them the whole way through the process. I make sure that they have what they need. And then when the time comes for them to be slaughtered, I make sure they've had a good life, a clean death. And I'm like, I would rather, if someone gave me the choice, right, you're going to be reincarnated as a sheep. Would you rather be reincarnated as a sheep who's going to have a really good life, a fairly quick, clean death, or either not exist at all, or be like out in the wild where nobody's looking after you and you get eaten alive by some predator? I know which I'd pick. I'd rather be on the farm, being looked after well, have a nice clean death. every time. And so because I can genuinely say that about, like, for my, I can do that job, okay, like, I don't have a problem doing that job. I'm aware I've been going on for a while. But I think I am just going to push on and just make this an epically long video. So, with that in mind, I do have an issue with it, as my job as a farmer, as an abattoir worker. It's my job to minimise pain and suffering and stress. I am fully 100% behind vegans and vegetarians who are campaigning against industrial scale livestock farming, because it can lead to horrific conditions for the animals. When you see factory, basically anytime the word factory and livestock are in the same sentence, it shouldn't, just no, because animals don't belong in factories. And when you have your factory egg farming and you see these chickens kept in horrific conditions, they are suffering. Should not be. When you see animals being transported hundreds and hundreds of miles, that will be stressing them out. I'm fortunate that I am I think it's an hour drive from my house to the abattoir, which, that's still an hour of stress, but they're not being transported for days. And you see, like, when you hear about like container ships of animals being transported like from one country to another, and they're like transported for like weeks at a time, and that's horrendous. That shouldn't be happening, in my opinion. These are living creatures. They do suffer pain, they do suffer like fear and distress, and you wouldn't do that to a person. You shouldn't be doing that. Like, I'm fully behind that no. And industrial scale abattoirs, I'm fortunate. I work at a very small scale abattoir where the management are fantastic. They are passionate. Like, if they were to see a member of staff mistreating an animal, that member of staff would be out the door before they could blink. They are very passionate. They only hire people who care about the animals, who will look after them well. I mean, I'm probably one of the few that actually sits and like talks to them the way I do. They maybe don't sit and like, I call them sweetheart and everything, and even when they're dead and I'm dealing with the carcass, I'm like, come on, sweetheart. It's just me. But this, because of I work in a small scale abattoir, we can only we kill like so many, like dealing with sheep for example, we'll kill so many sheep, they'll be strung up, but then the people at the back end will be processing them, skinning them and gutting them and all that kind of stuff. Say if there's they're like, oh, go kill 10 sheep, but there's 11 sheep in the pen, I will kill 9 sheep and I will leave 2 until they're able to take both sheep on the line. I never leave one sheep on its own in the pen, because that would be really distressing for that one sheep, because I understand sheep psychology. If a sheep has got a pal with them, they'll be much calmer. They're like, okay, no, I'm okay, I've got a pal. You can be taking off their pals and killing them one at a time, and there'll be, same kind of level of distress. When you take away that last pal and that last sheep is suddenly all by itself, it will get stressed out, because it's suddenly like, where's all my pals gone? Because they're herd animals and they need so I will always leave 2 until I'm ready to kill both of them immediately after the other, because I care about them. I care about reducing their stress. In big industrial scale abattoirs where they might be getting penned up for prolonged periods of time, and it's all being done on a big massive industrial scale, it doesn't sit so well with me about how well the job's being done and how well the animals will be getting handled. That doesn't sit well with me. So for me, I have got serious problems, and I believe that there are serious problems with industrial scale farming, especially when livestock is involved. And so I fully agree that, like, if I am picking between like eggs, I will eat free range eggs rather than like factory farmed eggs, because I don't agree with how factory farmed eggs are produced. But I also understand that in the world that we live in, so it'd be easy for me to say that we should ban all of that type of farming, but I also understand that the world that we live in, because we have such large populations and people have different demographics, people have different resources available to them. I appreciate that there's probably people within my own friend network who buy factory farmed meat to consume because they can't afford free range, high welfare meat. I appreciate that high welfare is expensive in comparison to the cheap factory farmed, and I appreciate that not everybody can afford the sustainable, ethical options. And this is where it gets complicated, it gets messy, and sweeping statements like, oh, the whole animal system should be abolished. We still need to feed people, and it's really difficult. And it's not as simple as switching from, oh, if you just cut out meat entirely and switch to plant-based, then it's ethical, it's moral, nothing dies. In industrial scale arable farming, so growing crops, even more animals die than killing, like, so killing one sheep will feed a family for months, if not a year, you know, with all the, when you've portioned it up, and if you eat the whole carcass, you can feed a family for a year. If you try to get that much, and that's one animal died, if you try to create that many meals for a family for that length of time from purely plant-based, I can guarantee you a lot more creatures will have died. Rabbits and birds and insects and well, not just rabbits, any type of rodent. So many creatures will have died in big combine harvesters and things, because industrial scale arable farming is just as bad for the earth, and just as bad as industrial scale animal farming. Because when you start having, at the start of this whole video, me talking about indigenous peoples and they're sustainable, they would fit into the ecosystem. As soon as you start having industrial scale farming, it is no longer fitting into the local ecosystem. It is damaging the earth. It is adding artificial fertilizer, which will then contaminate rivers. It is pesticide, which will affect birds and bees. It is affecting, like, the whole ecosystem. It's affecting the plants, the fauna, everything that's in that ecosystem. It's affecting the water, it's affecting everything. And that damage is substantial. And, you know, genetically modified crops is necessary to be able to produce, you know, feed people, and there's so many knock-on effects that is the problem that we face. There is no one solution where it's like, right, let's all go vegan and then that's going to solve all the world's problems. It won't, because it just transfers the problems elsewhere. Because the biggest problem is the fact that we're not living sustainably with the resources we have, because there's too many of us on this planet, and we can't work together as one human population. We don't work together to put the resources where they're needed. You have some people sitting with just nauseating level of wealth, while other people are starving for want. We are not capable as a human species to distribute resources equitably, and work together for the good of the planet and the good of each other. And so in that meantime, I'm a firm believer that with everything I've discussed up till now, the fact that animals are not the same as people, they don't have the same hopes and dreams, so where I personally sit in this whole thing, I am aware that I am in a place of privilege. I have the tenancy of a croft here in the Shetland Islands. Okay, the weather's not great. I'm not going to be able to be growing wheat anytime soon. We don't have the climate for it. But my personal goals and ambitions is to get to the point where I produce all of the meat that I personally consume, with the exception of pigs. I don't want to raise pigs because they're really hard to deal with. But then maybe I will cut out pork products from my diet. Who knows? But that is and I also hope to be able to grow as much food, like fruit and vegetables as I can, cut down on what I import from elsewhere. We're changing how we farm here to be able to be more self-sufficient. So for example, we're going to change to a native breed of sheep rather than having the crossbreeds that we've been previously working with. So we're not having to import as much like concentrate feed to feed them. So there's so many things where when you talk about ethics and the ethics of farming, there are so many. It's not just how the animals are treated, which I firmly believe that if everybody, whoever, if you can afford to buy high welfare meat, you should be buying high welfare meat. I think if you are able to raise your own animals, then you should be doing that. And if, for example, if eating higher welfare meat means that you can't afford as much meat and so therefore you eat less, I'm all for that. I'm all for the concept of having several days meat free in a week. So I feel like I'm not completely unreasonable. I don't completely reject all of the issues that vegans and vegetarians have, but I think because of my worldview, I have some fundamentally different perspectives about why I am comfortable bringing animals into the world and taking them out of the world again as my living and being part of that, because I think having dealt with things on a personal basis, so like getting a whole salmon and seeing, because my husband works for a salmon farm, so we're kind of offending everyone here, but getting a whole salmon and cooking it up, I was able to, my power's about to die, I was able to make like 30 portions of meals out of one fish. If you were to kill an animal like a sheep or a chicken, so often one issue with our the way we eat, the way we're disconnected, that disconnect that's created. People in cities go to the supermarket and they buy chicken breast. How many chicken... I know that back when I lived south and I didn't live on a farm, I always bought chicken breast. So I was only ever eating chicken breast. So how many chickens did I go through? Whereas if I ate like the whole chicken and had I probably would have been responsible for the death of a lot less chickens because I was eating the whole chicken. Now that we slaughter our own sheep, so we eat the heart, we eat the liver, the kidneys. I discovered I really like sheep heart. It tastes really nice and it's got a great texture. There's an old lady up the road that loves the sheep tongue, so we give her the tongues and we're eating the whole creature. And a roast can do us for a week, depending on how we cook it. And you're realising that one animal can provide so much. And it's understanding that within where you live, everybody in the world lives in different places. It's understanding where you live locally, what is produced locally that is sustainable. How is the best use of the land? Maybe you might live somewhere where growing crops is the best thing, plant crops is the best use of the local resources, in which case a vegetarian diet is the most sensible thing to do. Where we live, the ground is not suitable for wheat or something like that, but it grows sheep really well. So that's where having a mutton-based diet where I live is the most appropriate. And when it comes into the ethics of food, it's not just how the animals are treated, it's also how the humans involved in the process are treated. Do you have people working for, you know, almost like slave labour wages? Do you have child labour growing your food? Do you have people being displaced? Is your food contributing to deforestation? Is it contributing to climate change? Is it contributing, you know, are you flying your food halfway across the world? What is it doing to the water? That's a whole big topic which I might run out of battery before I can address. Is water is a limited resource in the world now, but a litre of water here in the UK is not the same as a litre of water in Sahara Africa, and so it's when you know, when they do a simple comparison of how much water goes into producing a pint of cow's milk versus a pint of almond milk, you have to not just look at, this is where my life cycle analysis learnings comes into play. You can't just go a litre of this milk versus a litre of that milk. You have to think about, where is that milk being produced? How much water is available where that milk is being, you know, what is the impact it's having local to that? So using water here in Shetland, for example, where we don't have droughts to produce something, it doesn't matter so much. Whereas if you're using water somewhere where water is limited, even if it's using less water, you'd still argue that that's still water that shouldn't be being used for that purpose. And so when it comes into the ethics of farming, it is so complex. And I think each one of us should, with what the resources and the knowledge we have available, we should all be striving to do the best we can and to be the best we can and to do what we can with what we have. And that, you know, these sweeping statements of calling sheep farmers like animal abusers and is not helpful to narrative. And it's important to remember that different people have got different situations, and that trying to live as best we can within our own personal ecosystems and our own personal locations. I think locally produced food, sustainably produced food, is far more important than whether it's an animal or a plant. But if animals are involved, they should always be treated ethically and humanely and with respect. And even when we're growing plants, we should be being careful to work with the local ecosystem, and being careful about things like pesticides, being careful about you know, what impact that's having on our local ecosystem. So that's my own personal worldview, my own personal opinions. I would obviously love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments. If there's certain areas that you'd like me to go into more detail in a separate video, then feel free. But I'm going to have to wrap up now because my phone is about to die. And I'm aware this is going to be like almost an hour and a half of video. So if you've stuck out to the end, then thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to actually listen. And yeah, take care, and I'll hopefully see you again sometime soon. Bye bye.